The funeral flowers hadn't even wilted when my wife's daughter, Rachel, stood right in the middle of the living room and said something I thought only existed in cheap TV dramas. "You're useless. Mom left everything to me. Go find somewhere else to die." The room fell silent like a church. I sat in my leather chair, the one I had reupholstered 3 times, the chair I'd spent a whole weekend cleaning to get rid of the musty smell. This was my home, the place where I laid every tile myself, the house where I stayed up late fixing a busted pipe. And now, with just 13 words, I was homeless. I'm Thomas Whitaker, 58 years old, a construction engineer, now partly retired, living off small contracts and savings. I'm not rich, nor am I smooth with words, but if you needed a bridge built across a river or a house that could survive a storm, I'm the guy you'd call. That skill kept this family standing for more than 20 years. Or at least, I thought it did. Rachel spoke like she had just hit the jackpot, while I was trying to chew the last bite of a funeral sandwich left on the table. Hard to eat when the person across from you just stole your home and kicked you out. Behind Rachel stood Ethan, her husband, always in a 3-piece suit as if auditioning for a minor role in Wall Street 2. He nodded, looking like a judge scoring his wife's performance. If there were a scoreboard, he'd give her a perfect 10 for kicking the stepdad out right after the funeral. "She really said that?" I asked, keeping my voice calm though my heart was racing. I've heard explosives go off near construction sites, but never one inside my own chest like this. Rachel crossed her arms, tilted her head, smiling in the way insurance agents do when selling life policies. "You heard me. My mom left everything to me. You're just a guest. And that guest privilege ends today." I looked around the house. The walls I had painted myself when Linda was healthy. The staircase I reinforced after a season of floods. Every detail in this house bore my sweat, and now I felt like a caught thief standing there waiting for judgment. Did it hurt? Yes, but instead of exploding, I let out a quiet chuckle. Because in that victorious moment for Rachel, I realized something. She had just opened a game she thought I couldn't play. Linda, my wife, had passed away from heart disease. We had spent over 20 years together. I took care of her, drove her to every doctor's appointment, even changed jobs to be home when she needed me. I thought that love would make Rachel see me as family at least once. My mistake was believing gratitude existed in someone who saw herself as the center of the universe. Then Ethan spoke, smooth as a toothpaste commercial. "Thomas, don't make this difficult. You're old. This house is beyond you. Rachel can manage it better. You should think about your comfort." Comfort? Comfort for me was the old sofa, the smell of morning coffee in the kitchen, the shadow of Linda flickering on the porch. Not the damp motel room they were trying to shove me into. I gave a thin smile, nodding like an old man surrendering. Sometimes to win, you have to play the loser. The happier Rachel got, the quieter I stayed. In my mind, one thought ruled. Linda would never let me leave empty-handed. And if her daughter thought otherwise, she had underestimated both me and her mother. They stood there, 2 young people thinking they had outsmarted a relic of a man. And I, sitting in my familiar leather chair, thought, so after 20 years of caring for this house, I'm being kicked out like a sick dog. And in that moment, the real game begins. I don't remember exactly when I stepped through that door, whether the afternoon sun on the porch was blazing gold or the sky had already turned gray. I only remember Ethan shoving $200 bills into my hand like a tip for a taxi driver. "Enough to get by a few days," he said, smiling like he was granting a favor. $200. After 20 years of living in and caring for this house, I was priced at 2 crumpled bills. I grabbed my small suitcase, stuffing in a few sets of clothes in the wooden box Linda had given me before she passed. I didn't open it. I only remembered her whisper that last night. "If they turn their backs on you, keep this." At the time, I thought she was just scared of illness. Now that advice felt like a secret map, the only thing left guiding me forward. Rachel stood with her arms crossed at the door, glancing at her watch as if I were holding up her spa appointment. No tears, no farewell. I dragged the suitcase across the tile I had laid with my own calloused hands. The sound clattered like the last nail being driven into the coffin of trust. Outside, Ethan's BMW was running. He politely opened the trunk and lifted my suitcase with the practiced ease of someone used to tossing out trash. I got into the back seat. The last time I left this house with Linda, we were going to the hospital. Today, I left like a tenant being kicked out at checkout. They dropped me at Sunset Inn, a motel tucked beside the highway, its red neon blinking vacancy. $49 a night, and it lived up to its price. The hallway carpet was worn to the texture of crocodile skin, the bleach smell mixing with mildew and cigarette smoke. I had the feeling that if I turned on a blacklight, the whole room would glow like a star map. The sheets were as thin as tissue paper. The old AC groaned with each breath, like an asthmatic old man struggling to inhale. The couple next door argued loudly enough for me to catch every word. At least they were arguing while I was being evicted in absentia. I set my suitcase down and sat on the bed. The mattress sagged on one side as if it had witnessed too many human failures. I laughed, a raspy, sharp laugh. At least, I whispered to myself, here I don't have to hear Rachel call me a parasite. I only have to hear the AC wheeze like an old man's asthma. The $200 Ethan gave me still sat in my jacket pocket. With careful stretching, I could make it last 4 nights. 5 if I skipped breakfast. I once calculated steel, cement, and tiles for million-dollar projects. Now I was counting pennies like a new graduate. I looked around the room. An old flat-screen TV, the remote missing its battery cover, a scarred wooden table and 2 plastic chairs, one wobbling as if about to break. The room had nothing, yet oddly, I felt more comfortable here alone than I ever did in the mansion with Rachel and Ethan. A filthy place, but quiet, felt better than a luxurious home full of contempt. I placed Linda's wooden box on the table. Just looking at it made my chest tighten. Did she sense this would happen? She always knew Rachel was selfish, but maybe she never imagined her daughter standing at her mother's coffin to take everything. I touched the box but didn't open it. I wasn't ready to face whatever was inside. I lay down, eyes on the ceiling. Paint peeled in chunks like a world map. I found the shape of Arizona right above me, a cheap form of entertainment, but maybe I needed it to forget the present. In the darkness, memories flooded back. Linda smiling as I finished the new porch, calling me the most devoted handyman in the world. Sweet memories, but painfully sharp. That night, I didn't sleep much. I listened to trucks on the highway, doors slamming in neighboring rooms. Occasionally, I heard someone giggle, then a glass shatter. Each room here seemed to hold its own tragedy. And now I had a room of my own in this shabby row of buildings. The next morning, I woke early. Free breakfast was thin coffee, watery as dishwater, and donuts hard as bricks. I chewed slowly, thinking about life. A man who once oversaw bridges and roads is now eating cheap motel donuts. They say America is the land of opportunity. True, and also the land where a single word from a relative can push you to the bottom. I looked at the remaining $200. I could rent the room a few more days, but then what? Rachel thought she had won. Ethan thought they had cleared out the old man in the way, but they didn't know Linda had left me more than memories. I hadn't opened the wooden box yet, but a strange feeling flared inside me. This wasn't the end. This was only the overture to a much longer play. They say you have to hit rock bottom to rise again. I sat in my $49 room, listening to the wheezing AC and neighbors yelling, and I knew one thing: I just hit rock bottom. And from here, the only way was up. I spent 2 days staring at that wooden box like it was a ticking bomb. It sat proudly on the scarred motel table next to the thin plastic cup of coffee and the donut I hadn't finished. Linda always had strange habits. She liked hiding important things in the simplest, most ridiculous places. Once, I found her spare wedding ring in a flower container because she said no one would think to look there. So when Linda handed me the small wooden box, I knew it held more than just a few keepsake photos. I touched the lid. The oak was smooth, slightly scratched at one corner, the mark I made helping Linda tidy the living room. I inhaled deeply and opened it. Inside, on faded velvet, lay a Mont Blanc pen and a blue folder neatly labeled in familiar handwriting. L.W. Legacy. I had never seen Linda use that pen, but she kept it like a treasure. Seeing it there, I knew this wasn't a sentimental keepsake. This was a weapon. I flipped open the folder. On the first page was a handwritten letter from Linda. Her voice came through clearly, as if she were speaking right next to me. Thomas, if you are still alive, we might have read this together. But if you're holding it, the worst has happened. You know Rachel, I love her, but I am not blind. I fear the day she will turn on you, see you as an outsider. If that day comes, you must know I will not leave you abandoned. Take this file to Harold Jensen. He knows everything. I set the letter down, swallowing hard. Linda had always planned ahead, but I never imagined she would plan this far in advance. The next day, I stuffed the folder into my old backpack and caught a bus to Harold Jensen's office. His office was on the third floor of an old gray stone building in the city center. A brass plaque on the door simply read, Harold P. Jensen, attorney at law. I pushed open the door. The scent of polished wood and old paper greeted me, comforting like a library. The secretary recognized me immediately. Mr. Whitaker, she said, come in. Mr. Jensen is expecting you. Harold Jensen appeared, thin, gray-haired, but his eyes were sharp and lively. He shook my hand firmly. Thomas, I offer my condolences. Linda was an extraordinary woman. I nodded, placing the folder on the desk. Linda left this for me. She told me to give it to you. Harold opened it, scanning the pages, then raised an eyebrow. Ah, she did exactly what I advised. Thomas, did you know Linda updated her will 6 months before passing? I shook my head. Rachel told me she inherited everything. That's why I ended up in a $49 motel. Harold gave a faint, half-pitying, half-angry smile. Then the girl just played the dumbest hand of her life. He pulled out the newest will, still smelling of fresh ink. I saw Linda's signature, slightly shaky but clear. Harold read each line slowly, like an alarm clock ringing. I, Linda Whitaker, in sound mind, leave my husband, Thomas Whitaker, the right to live in the residence at 2457 Maple Lane for life, along with 30% of all financial assets. To my daughter, Rachel Whitaker Hayes, I leave 70% of the remaining assets, but this inheritance is conditional upon her treating my husband, Thomas, with respect and care after my passing. I sat frozen, each word hammered into my head. Lifetime residency, 30% of assets, and the binding condition for Rachel. Harold looked up, his glasses sliding down his nose. Thomas, he said, do you understand? If Rachel shows any neglect, her inheritance is void. And I think he paused, raising an eyebrow. The phrase, find another place to die, says it all. I laughed, a dry, raspy laugh echoing through the room. So the girl just cut off $40 million right in front of me. Exactly, Harold said, his voice cold. You are not homeless as she thinks. You hold the keys. I leaned back in the chair, gripping the Mont Blanc pen. The pen had never written a word for Linda, but now it symbolized power. One signature could change the entire game. I remembered that afternoon Rachel shoved me out, Ethan handing me $200 like throwing scraps to a beggar. They thought I could only afford a motel room and cheap donuts. But in that wooden box, Linda had left me something stronger than any weapon. Proof. Stepping out of Harold's office, I stood in the street, the wind ruffling my silver hair. I no longer felt like the man kicked out of his home. I was holding a move my opponent hadn't even seen coming. Rachel thought she had checkmated me. The game was just beginning, and Linda had quietly placed me as the queen on the board. When Harold Jensen filed the new will with the court and sent notice to the bank, I figured Rachel would catch on right away. But I didn't expect the slap to echo that loudly. That afternoon, Ethan strutted into a fancy Italian restaurant with a few financial partners, waving his leather wallet like a badge of honor. It was the kind of place that served tiny plates just to cover up the fact you were paying for air, not food. He ordered a $400 bottle of wine and flashed his platinum card like it was a royal crown. The machine beeped, the screen lit up in bright red. Declined. The story spread faster than the flu. The waiter whispered to the manager. The partners pretended to study the menu, but I knew they were laughing inside. Ethan flipped the card back and forth like a child believing if he turned it upside down, the outcome would magically change. But no, the word declined burned across the screen like a billboard of shame. At the same time, Rachel was trying on dresses at a boutique in Scottsdale. Arms stacked with clothes, she walked the aisles like a queen on the red carpet, telling the clerk to fetch smaller sizes because I'm losing weight. At checkout, the register gave a long, sharp beep. The clerk squinted at her, then said softly, "Sorry, your card was declined." Rachel forced a smile, handed over another card. Again, declined. People in line started murmuring. A heavy-set woman in workout clothes giggled. An old man clicked his tongue. I wish I'd been there to clap. The scene must have looked like a bad sitcom, missing only the laugh track. Rachel snapped, slamming her handbag on the counter. Do you know who I am? The classic line of someone losing power. The clerk just shrugged. A customer who can't pay. Honestly, that comeback deserved an Emmy. Within 24 hours, every account under Rachel and Ethan's name was frozen. The little company Ethan ran turned into a financial corpse overnight. Calls poured in from partners, employees, and even friends. Their credit card castle collapsed in silence. And just as I predicted, the next evening came a knock at my motel door. I opened it to see Rachel standing there. No designer dress, no $1,000 purse, just red, swollen eyes, mascara smudged like a bad painting, and a trembling voice. Thomas, we need to talk. I stepped aside, pointed at the wobbly plastic chair. Careful sitting down. It's as weak as your husband's financial ethics. Rachel sat, twisting her hands like frayed wires. She drew in a shaky breath, forcing out tears. We're family. Mom wanted us united. You can't do this to me, I laughed, rough and dry as crumpled paper. Family. Linda defined that differently. Family doesn't throw me out on the street with $200 and a wish to die soon. Rachel lowered her head. For the first time, I saw her truly rattled. No spoiled princess pose, no air of untouchable wealth. Just a woman who had toppled her own throne. She tried to fight back. You misunderstood. I only thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. The house was too big. I cut her off. You called me useless. That wasn't concern. That was a death sentence for a stepfather-stepdaughter bond. And now the lawyer stamped it in red. Congratulations. I placed a wooden box on the table, lid cracked open, a green folder, and a Mont Blanc pen gleaming inside. Linda left a game, and you already lost the first round. I don't need to say much. The papers speak for me. Rachel's voice broke. But if you take it all, I'll have nothing. My kids. God, Ethan will lose his mind. I leaned back, arms crossed, watching her like a bad play. Oh, I'm sure Ethan already did. Yesterday's lunch turned into a layaway dinner. I heard that $400 duck and wine got replaced with instant noodles. Rachel covered her face and sobbed. But tears don't erase ink in a will. Tears don't unlock frozen accounts. And even in those tears, I saw a hint of performance, a woman auditioning as a victim to win back mercy. I rose slowly, set a hand on her shoulder. Rachel, your mother warned you. She knew your nature. She loved you, but she wasn't blind. That condition in the will wasn't a joke. It was a mirror, and you just shattered it with your own hand. Rachel looked up, eyes filled with both hate and pleading. What will you do? I shrugged. Nothing. I'll just sit here listening to the air conditioner groan like an old man, waiting for you to collapse. Linda already programmed the game. I only pressed start. She staggered out as if the world had caved in. I watched her go, not joyful, not pitying, just relieved. That night, I poured myself a cheap bourbon from the corner store. Sip by sip, I thought back to the day they kicked me out of the house. The sting of humiliation still lingered. But now I had a weapon. Not a hammer, not concrete, but legal documents. The very ones Linda left behind. I laughed to myself. Who would have thought the man branded useless now held the keys to $40 million? Life is a strange construction site. Only this time, I don't need bricks. I have the will, and I have Linda on my side, even from the grave. The Scottsdale County Courthouse wasn't the kind of courtroom you see in Hollywood movies, polished and orderly like a symphony hall. It looked more like an old classroom dressed up in a hurry, with water stains on the ceiling, a vent buzzing overhead, and wooden chairs that squeaked every time someone shifted. But inside that ordinary frame, a $40 million family drama was about to premiere. Rachel walked in wearing a tight black dress, her makeup layered as if she were at a film premiere instead of a will hearing. Ethan followed, lugging a leather briefcase as if it held the secrets of the world. I sat at the opposite table, my old suit clean but modest, a USB drive in my pocket carrying the video Linda had recorded before she died. I didn't bring an act. I brought evidence. The moment the judge sat down, Rachel launched her scene. Her voice trembled, but carried far enough for everyone to hear. Your Honor, I believe Thomas Whitaker took advantage of my mother when she was sick. He pressured her, forced her to change her will in his favor. She was not of sound mind. I only want to protect her honor. I nearly laughed but swallowed it down. Rachel spoke of honor while her face shone oily under the powder, like a soap opera actress overplaying a tearful scene. Ethan added his spice. We have proof. This is the original will, leaving everything to Rachel. Any other documents are forged or coerced. He pulled out a stack of papers and slammed them on the table like he'd just laid down an ace in a poker game. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Whitaker, do you have a response? I stood, calm as if I were about to tell a joke. Your Honor, I don't need theatrics. I have only one video, and the person speaking in it is Linda Whitaker herself, the true owner of this estate. She recorded it before she passed in case her daughter ever decided to perform. I plugged the USB into the court projector. The screen lit up. Linda appeared, thinner but with clear, sharp eyes. Her voice rang out steady and strong. If you're watching this, Rachel, then the worst has happened. I hoped I was wrong, but I feared you would turn against Thomas. You always believed you were special, but being special isn't an excuse to belittle others. If you fail to treat Thomas with respect, all of your inheritance will pass to him. This is my final decision. The courtroom went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the judge set down his pen and leaned forward. Rachel's face drained of color, her lips trembling, while Ethan, the man who always smiled like a toothpaste ad, was drenched in sweat as if standing in a desert at noon. Linda's voice continued. Thomas cared for me through my final years. You may not value that, but I do. Money is only paper. Respect is the real inheritance. If you fail in that, you lose everything. When the video ended, I didn't say a word. I simply sat down, arms crossed, letting the silence finish the job. The judge struck the gavel once. Clear, the will is valid, and the video confirms the intent of the deceased. The court recognizes Mr. Whitaker's rights and Mrs. Rachel Hayes' breach of the inheritance condition. Rachel shot to her feet, shrill. No, this is fabricated. He staged all of it. My mother would never. Sit down, Mrs. Hayes, the judge cut her off, voice cold as stone. Interrupt again, and you will be removed from this courtroom. Ethan tried to steady her, whispering something, but he looked paler than she did. No doubt he was calculating the loans he'd taken against an inheritance that had just vanished into thin air. I turned to them, sighed and said, for the first time in her life, she actually stayed quiet and let someone else speak. A few people chuckled. Even the judge smirked before rapping the gavel again for order. Rachel buried her face in her hands, mascara streaking down like spilled ink. Ethan hurried to shove his so-called original will back into the briefcase, avoiding everyone's eyes. I rose, not rushing, not gloating, only steady enough for them to see I hadn't bent. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to beg for belief. Linda had spoken for me, and her words carried farther than any argument I could make. In that moment, the balance of power shifted completely. Rachel, once the $40 million queen, was now the violator. Ethan, once the financial advisor, was reduced to a pitiful extra. And me, the so-called useless engineer, had become the only one holding the keys. I used to think watching someone lose everything would be quiet. Turns out, it's loud enough to be funny. The press swarmed like vultures at a buffet. Headlines about the stepdaughter stripped of $40 million plastered every local paper. Reporters called me like I had just won the Powerball. Meanwhile, Rachel vanished from social media, which was a miracle in itself since she used to post more pictures of cappuccinos than times I got to finish a sentence at family dinners. Ethan didn't fare any better. Less than a week after the hearing, regulators opened an investigation into small but persistent fraud at his firm. The kind of fraud you'd expect from a man who lectured everyone on financial ethics. Employees quit, partners pulled out, and suddenly Ethan was too busy scrambling to fake a smile. As for me, I returned to the mansion on Maple Lane. Yes, the very house they once threw me out of with $200 and a wish for an early grave. This time I walked in with a legal key and a court order in my pocket. The police stood by as Rachel packed her things. I leaned on the doorway holding the wooden box, watching her stuff clothes and handbags into suitcases. She looked at me, eyes full of rage and fear. "Thomas, are you really taking everything? I have children. They're innocent." I sighed and said flatly, "You were given a chance. You threw it away. Now learn to live without it." It wasn't a threat. It was a summary, a simple equation. Insult your mother, lose your money. I once studied applied math to build bridges, but I had never seen a problem this easy. Rachel broke down, mascara streaking like paint on wet siding. It should have been tragic, but to me it looked like a bad sitcom scene, the kind where the main character cries while tumbling down the stairs. Ethan tried to salvage dignity, handing her a suitcase. "Let's go, Rachel." His voice trembled like a guitar string. In my head, I thought, first time he hasn't smiled. That's one achievement. After they left, I gathered everything Rachel had abandoned, from designer heels to overpriced cosmetics, and piled it in the backyard. I called Goodwill to pick it up. The driver asked, "Not keeping anything?" I answered, "Why would I? All I need is this wooden box. Everything else is expensive trash." That night, I opened the box, laid the Mont Blanc pen on the table. It gleamed under the lamp like Linda's silent reminder. She had planned it all. What they thought was a prize had been a legal mousetrap, and they walked right in. But Rachel didn't give up easily. 3 days later, she knocked on the mansion door. No makeup, no heels, just a worn-out woman clutching her young son. The boy stared at me, wide-eyed, while Rachel began her next act. "Thomas, please. For the children, they don't deserve this. Let me keep a portion. Just a little. I promise I'll change." I let them in, poured her a glass of water. She drank it in one gulp like someone crawling out of the desert. I sat across from her, my hand resting on the wooden box. "Rachel, what you call a little portion is still a few $1,000,000. I once lived on $7 lunches and survived. You can learn the same." She sobbed. "You're taking revenge." I smirked. "No, this isn't revenge, it's math. Insult your mother, lose your money. Simple as that." She had nothing left to say, only hugged her child tighter. I looked at the boy, my heart sinking for a moment. He wasn't guilty of anything. But I remembered Linda's words clearly. Don't let pity become an excuse for injustice. Rachel left in silence. As the door closed, I saw in her eyes a flicker of realization. She had no cards left. Ethan was different. He called me a week later. His voice rushed. "Thomas, we can negotiate. I have an investment plan. If you give me access to a portion of the assets, I can double it in 2 years." I laughed out loud. "Ethan, you just lost your company to fraud, and now you're calling me for funding. That's like inviting the police to dinner." He hung up, probably realizing he had only poured fuel on ashes. I sat in the living room looking around the house. No sound of heels clattering on the floor, no Rachel's constant nagging, no Ethan pitching investments like he was running Wall Street. Just me, the wooden box, and Linda's voice echoing in memory. The wooden box, her last legacy, was now proof of victory. It felt like an invisible contract between her and me. She trusted I would not let anyone trample loyalty, and I had kept my word. That evening I sat on the porch, poured bourbon, and watched the moonlight spill over Linda's rose garden. I laughed quietly to myself, not at the 40 million, but at the rare sense of justice. This time, arrogance had hit itself in the face. Rachel can call me useless. Ethan can see me as dead weight. But Linda knew better, and now the world knew too. I lifted my glass and murmured, "This isn't revenge, this is math." When the house officially returned to my name, the first feeling wasn't triumph, it was emptiness. $40 million transferred into my account with a cheerful chime on my phone, but all I heard in my head was silence. Linda was gone, Rachel vanished from social media like a faded star, and Ethan was busy answering investigators' questions. And me, a 58-year-old engineer once thrown out of his own home, sat in the cavernous living room listening to the grandfather clock tick. I decided the house would not remain a museum of humiliation. Linda once called me the most dedicated fixer in the world, and now I had the chance to fix the biggest thing of all, my life. The living room, once a stage where Rachel announced I was useless, became my studio. Yes, me, a civil engineer who had spent a lifetime with concrete and steel, now holding brushes instead of blueprints. But trust me, nothing clears the soul like spreading paint across canvas and calling it art, especially when you know the wall once echoed with "go die somewhere else." I set up an easel in the center of the room, hung bright lights, arranged brushes, paints, and my first sketches. They wouldn't win awards, but at least they belonged to me. Each brushstroke felt like erasing one more venomous memory Rachel had left behind. I painted bridges, roses, even the house itself, but without Ethan or Rachel, only sunlight and trees. Linda's rose garden I left untouched. I still watered it every morning, fertilized it on schedule. That garden wasn't stained by betrayal. It was pure memory. Whenever the scent drifted through the air, I heard Linda's soft laugh, the laugh that carried me through the dreariest mornings. But painting and gardening weren't enough. Linda had devoted her life to community. She volunteered, donated to student scholarships. If she were alive, she would tell me, "Thomas, do something useful. Don't just sit around drinking bourbon and painting bridges." So I founded the Linda Whitaker Foundation. Seed capital, $10 million from the inheritance. The fund provides scholarships for engineering students, kids with dreams of becoming builders, but blocked by tuition. I knew that feeling well. At 19, I worked night shifts on construction sites to pay for classes. Now I could turn my sweat into a launch pad for the next generation. The media caught on faster than I expected. One morning, I opened the local paper and saw the headline, "Man once thrown out by stepdaughter creates multi-million-dollar fund for students." The story spread from business news to human interest features. A TV station interviewed me, asking how it felt to be betrayed and then flipped the script. I shrugged. It's simple. If you think life past 50 has no more surprises, I'm sorry. But I just became the lead character in the movie my stepdaughter wrote. I just rewrote the ending. The audience laughed, but I wasn't joking. Rachel wrote the opening act. The useless man cast out. I added the final chapter. The man who returned, rebuilt, and turned humiliation into a legacy. The first scholarship ceremonies moved me in ways I didn't expect. Watching young faces clutch their certificates, I saw myself at 19, stepping nervously into class with worn-out shoes. One girl told me, "I'll build a bridge to connect my grandparents' town." "Thank you," I smiled. "Build it strong, don't let it fall. I don't want to deal with the insurance." A reporter once asked if I felt satisfied seeing Rachel penniless. I thought for a moment, then said, "No. I feel satisfied because Linda was right. She believed in me, and now everyone sees why." The wooden box now sits on my desk in the studio, no longer a secret but a symbol. I keep it slightly open, the Mont Blanc pen resting inside. Every time a student receives a scholarship, I ask them to sign the foundation's book with that pen. I want them to know legacy isn't money. It's a promise signed in trust. Neighbors began dropping by more often. They brought pizzas, fruit, and jokes. "Thomas, I always thought you were too gentle, Baum, letting everyone step on you. Now you're famous. The whole country sees you as a symbol of elder justice." I laughed. "I'm just the old man who got kicked out." Luckily, I could read a will. Sometimes I sit in the studio staring at a half-finished painting and laugh. Who would have thought a retired engineer once counting coins in a motel would end up running a multi-million-dollar foundation? Life does enjoy a few plot twists. And Rachel, I heard she moved into a small apartment, working part-time at a jewelry store. People said she was thinner, rarely seen with friends. I felt neither joy nor pity. It was simple math. Actions equal consequences. As for me, every morning I open the studio windows, let the light flood in. I paint. I water Linda's roses. I sign papers for the foundation. I live as if Linda still stood behind me, hand on my shoulder, smiling. Rebirth doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means finally daring to live as yourself. And I, Thomas Whitaker, the man once branded useless, have found myself again in this house. Not just as the keeper of Linda's legacy, but as the one carrying it forward in my own way. One July afternoon, I sat on the porch where Linda once loved to drink tea. On the wooden table before me rested the familiar wooden box and the gleaming Mont Blanc pen. In these past months, they had shifted from secret to proof, from proof to symbol, and from symbol to reminder. I tapped my fingers lightly on the lid. The sound echoed steadily, like the heartbeat of the house that had seen me cast out and then welcomed me back in silent triumph. I took a sip of bourbon and leaned back in the chair. For years, I thought the only way to be believed was to argue, to shout louder, to fight for every inch. But the truth is, all I needed was to sit still and let the truth do its job. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to beg. The truth carried enough weight on its own, and the truth carried farther than I ever expected. After the hearing, the press chased me like I was some rising star. They wanted me to replay Rachel's unmasking in court, to analyze Ethan's sweating face. I only smiled and said, "I'm not an actor. I'm just a survivor." That alone made them scribble like I'd handed out a new philosophy of life. People love a simple script. Betrayer falls, outcast rises. But reality is never that clean. I had nights in a $49 motel convinced I had no value left. I almost believed Rachel when she showed up at my door, tears fake but convincing. Without Linda's wooden box, I might still be counting dollars for next week's rent. I looked at the box and smiled. Linda had seen farther than all of us, far enough not only to protect me, but to sketch out a map for tomorrow. And me, a civil engineer, finally understood that sometimes the greatest structure you build isn't with bricks and steel, but with patience and trust. I know many people want updates on Rachel. Truth is, I don't follow much. I heard she lives in a small apartment now, working part-time. Ethan is buried in investigations, his smile no longer currency. That wasn't the ending I wrote for them. That was the ending they chose for themselves. But there's one detail I've kept to myself until now. While Rachel lost everything, her children are innocent. They didn't choose their parents, nor their parents' greed. So I quietly opened a savings account in Linda's grandson's name. I add a little each month. No one knows. No one asks. One day, when he's grown, he'll find it waiting. Not as a gift, but as an opportunity. The very thing his mother threw away. I won't tell Rachel. She would twist it into leverage. And I don't need anyone to call me noble. I do it for Linda. She loved her grandson, and I honor that love. If I'm the only one left to remember it, then it's my duty. I share this not to polish my image. If someone thinks I'm weak, I don't care. I believe Linda would smile from somewhere, seeing that I kept both justice and a sliver of compassion. That afternoon, the sun poured through the trees, lighting the painting I had just finished in the studio, a bridge stretching across a river, solid, glowing under the sun. I lifted the Mont Blanc pen and signed the corner. The signature shook slightly, but it was enough. For me, it was a declaration. I am still here. I am not erased. I can still create. Sometimes I think, if Rachel hadn't kicked me out, I might still be the gentle old man mowing the lawn and running errands for milk. I would never have discovered that Linda had prepared a way forward for me. I would never have known I could rise again. The cruel kick had become the lever that lifted me. I tell this not to complain. Complaining brings nothing but headaches. I tell it to remind you that silence can be the sharpest counterattack. Rachel screamed, Ethan waved forged papers, and I simply opened a box and pressed play. That was enough. Now I turn to you, listening to an old man retell a family tragedy like a weekend sitcom. If you believe silence and truth are the strongest weapons, hit subscribe. Turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story where the betrayer collapses and the cast out finds his worth again.